Welcome to the High Note Podcast. In this episode, we get to sit down with Dr. John Skidmore, a psychologist and peak performance coach with decades of experience helping musicians go from average to extraordinary. I first met Dr. Skidmore more than 7 years ago, and our brief interaction stuck with me ever since. In this episode, we get to dive deep on all the techniques that he's been using with musicians to help make sure they never have to deal with stage fright and can just find their sense of flow every time and stay there as long as they need to. And if you're a musician who wants to find their flow and stay in it more, the first step might be taking the mind-body connection assessment, available for free in the description down below. Welcome to the High Note Podcast. I am Ted Zunnicki, founder of High Note Performance and HNPacademy.com, where we bring the tools perfected by sports science and neurology to vocal artists to turn singers into the world-class athletes that companies want to hire again and again and again. With me today, I could not be more excited to welcome someone from my very own past. He's had a long past of himself, of course, but this gentleman taught me how to juggle all the way back in 2017 at the Taos Opera Institute over a summer program there. The one and only Dr. John Skidmore. John, pleasure to see you again.
Ted, it is a delight to be on your podcast, and it's just a delight to see what you've done and progressed, and what you've taken, your talents and skills forward with. And I loved it when you sent back to me, and I still remember how to juggle. See, that's one of those things that we never forget if we've got those neural pathways.
Absolutely.
And it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. So I suppose we should start with the most pressing question. John, Why did you teach me how to juggle? I'm an opera singer.
Well, there's a number of different reasons why I taught you how to juggle. First, it is an incredible example of how we learn. We take one chunk and we figure out what to do with one piece. Then we add another piece and we figure out what to do with that. We want these two to work in harmony, especially from this music standpoint. We want a harmonious relationship here. Well, as soon as we bring another variable into this harmonious relationship, there's going to be some breakdowns. We're dropping the balls all over the place. And so we really get to see a wonderful example. There's really about three things I focus on with this juggling thing. First, it's just how we go through a learning process. And whether we're bringing on a new piece of music, starting a new show, there's just this learning process we go through. The second thing I like about juggling is about the time I'm coaching a group and they start to get into the third ball, trying to get that third ball to work, the frustration level in the room starts to elevate.
Oh yeah, I remember.
It goes, whoa. And on more than a few occasions, I've had to stop somebody. It's like, okay, hold it, Ted. The next time you drop the ball, I want to hear a shout out of woohoo, I am learning to juggle.
I remember that clearly. I still do that today.
And it's like, wait a minute. Because that first response, the metaphor that comes out of this is we have a trained response, that neurology stuff you're talking about, a first response when we drop the ball. Now, it's not that different the first response when you make a mistake on stage, or you're in your lesson and it didn't go the way you wanted it to, or you're in the studio trying to record and this is the third time you're running that thing and it's just not coming together. Okay, it heightens, well, it just really magnifies our response that's trained into us about negativity. And the third thing I find really fascinating about juggling, it can be a marvelous metaphor for the experience of flow. See, you're in that struggle phase and you stay in that struggle phase and you're struggle, and suddenly it's like, pop, there it is. I just did it. And every time, whoa, I just did it. And, you stay in that flow zone there for a little while, and then suddenly you go out of it again. And how do you go in and out of that? So it's really, to me, an example of when you're really juggling, you can't be analyzing or thinking. You got to be right there in that moment or you drop the ball.
Absolutely.
So great question. I love that.
Yeah, because you got to just do it, right? And
Yeah.
it blends so perfectly in with singing, right? When you're on stage, when you're performing your aria, when you're telling a story, you can't be thinking about all of the little bits of your technique that you spent the last 5, 10, 15, 50 years perfecting. You're just on stage sharing a beautiful moment, sharing a story with your audience. Now, I of course know that you are a peak performance coach. That might be a
Yes,
title that you've coined. I know other people have claimed it since then, but you've been doing
sure.
it for such a long time. What does that mean? What is a peak performance coach in your eyes?
My background is actually music with a vocal scholarship and singing through all the college years and even through my master's degree in counseling. I was singing, voice lessons,
Hmm.
but I was never taught about the psychology of performing. And so back when I got into this, I was actually singing with an elite performing choir, and I'm discovering that all the tools that I'd learned in my counseling program were like applicable. And that's when I got interested in sports psychology.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time talking to the track coach and talking to the other coaches and say, okay, what's going on here? How do we apply this stuff? And so it's really, to me, a question of psychology as a field that deals with people who are here and they struggle, and we want to get them back up to here.
Hmm.
And in a sense, oh, the diagnosis went away, you're good, bye. Now we start talking about peak performance coaching. We got people that are here and they've got goals and visions, their intentions. They want to move from here to there. And so it's really an application of all the tools and skills of positive psychology, sports psychology, that really help us develop processes and tools that allow us to share those gifts and tell those stories, to sing those songs, and have the impact we'd like to have with that.
Yeah.
And so it's really about the psychology of performance.
Fantastic. Absolutely. So, when you talk about psychology, of course, just putting it in terms that I've used before and that resonate maybe with people who've been listening, psychology is incredibly valuable, and we all need it. It's very frontal lobe focused. Right.
Absolutely.
So much on the prefrontal cortex and all of those pieces that are the decision-making parts of the brain. And you spend quite a bit of time talking about that in your book, Conquering Anxiety, right?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Well, I appreciate that. We don't often look at our brain as a peak performance tool.
Hmm.
And for too many of us, it becomes the enemy. It's like, man, I know I could do this, but for some reason, my brain, I just couldn't. Oh, man, where'd my words go? Where'd my blocking go?
Right.
I turned the wrong way and I didn't know what to do. And so to really understand the neurology behind what we're doing gives us access to tools that can make such a huge difference. One of my favorite little tips, if you will, and it's really based in neurology, it's the sense of, do I have stage fright? That sounds like I've got cancer. That sounds like I've got a terrible disease. Or is my sympathetic nervous system activated?
Yeah, when you put a title on it, it becomes a diagnosis, and diagnoses are scary.
Yeah,
Whereas it's just a thing. Oh, I can change that. No
I know
big
what my
deal.
sympathetic nervous system is.
Yeah.
And in fact, I like to use the term activated.
Hmm.
In fact, as I coach people individually, I coach them to use the word activated rather than nervous, anxious, stage fright, performance anxiety, panic. It's like, I'm activated.
Yeah. No big deal. I can be
No big deal.
activated means I can dial that back too. No sweat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm activated and I know what to do to deactivate and manage that. I had a 9-year-old girl in my Musician's Path to Peak Performance
Hmm.
workshop at one point in time. And she went to an audition. She landed that audition. But as we're talking about this audition, which was very exciting for her, she talked about going into this big room with all these kids and parents. She was 9 years
Hmm.
old, teachers, all these other people there. And she goes, I saw just how activated all those kids were.
Oh, so she even started using the vernacular. That's
At
awesome.
9, I saw how activated they were, and they didn't know what to do to manage that. And I was a little activated, but I managed it fine.
Mm.
Now, when I start thinking about knowing that vernacular at the age of 9 and like, oh, this is just this thing that happens sometimes and I can manage it. Pretty cool.
What an incredible head start that
Oh,
that 9-year-old had that she can use for the rest of her life, whether she chooses to
absolutely.
become a professional musician or not.
Yeah.
The skill absolutely transfers over. So you mentioned something in there that I know you talk about in the book, but I would love for you to go into a little bit more depth. the concept of being overactivated versus underactivated, or right on the money.
Yeah. You know, there's been some interesting studies and things like that was done that says, okay, we have an optimal level of activation for whatever our task is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you were playing chess, that would require a certain level of activation. If you're on a balance beam, that would require a different type of activation than it would if you were on the floor exercising gymnastics.
Mm-hmm.
And so, one, it's recognizing that there's an optimal level of energy that we would like to have. And then two is if we have too much energy, it's going to interfere. Now, as a performer, as a singer, there's lots of fine motor control going on.
Tons.
And when we get activated and we're in that brain that says, let's fight, let's run, fine motor control is really not a concern. It's like we want large muscles to fight or to run.
Yeah. We need the
And
quad
so,
muscles to turn on so we can extend our leg and sprint that way.
absolutely,
Yeah.
and so to be able to look at this and say, okay, how do I calm myself down? And how do I get myself back into that window if I'm out of it, if I'm too high?
Mm-hmm.
How do I keep myself from going out there too far? That's another set of skills.
Yeah.
And also, there's times where, okay, what's going on if I'm underactivated? Now, typically when that occurs, there's either like a health issue, some kind of physical thing that's really impacting that, or definitely a motivation commitment issue.
Mm.
This is the 117th time I've done this show, and I'm so bored that I just don't want to. Oh, and so it's always that question of what's going on. And then we've got our emotional, physical, environmental world that impacts this energy level that we have to look at. And we're always juggling that too,
Yeah.
in terms of a good night's sleep, in terms of nutrition, in terms of physical conditioning. So there's a lot of things that impact the that window, I like to refer to it. But it's nice to know when we're there and to be able to say, oh, I can manage this. This is where I want to be.
Do you find that that ability to manage that improves? Is it a skill just like anything else, or is it something that you're either born with it or you're not?
Oh, it's definitely a skill. In my performance psychology class at Brigham Young University, I require my students to do 60 meditation sessions throughout the course of the semester.
60, that's a lot.
Well, it's almost about every other day, every day. And most of them get in the habit of doing it every day. And by doing that on a regular basis, so that's one thing when I coach people individually, I'm talking about what is your current meditation plan or program? What do you do?
That's great.
Well, sometimes I sit in a hot tub. Okay, well that's not a bad thing to do, but
Yeah.
And it's fun to notice that when I first started to talk about like meditation strategies, I loved it once when I had a group of about 90 music educators, and I simply asked them, "Who here has been taught in a formal way about the stress response and effective research-based strategies to deactivate?" One hand went up, and it was a former student. I was like, "Yeah, doc,
I got the one.
I got
There
the
it
one.
is.
Got the one." Now I'm finding about 20% of an audience will put their hands in the air.
Okay, so a huge improvement, but
Huge.
still a long way to go.
Yeah. So if your listeners, if you're not really engaging like every day, even for just 3 minutes, um, in that sense, I'm intentionally calming my body, you're missing out on a really important skill to train.
Mm.
Because the more you practice this, the faster and more effective it is in working for you. And it just doesn't become a scary thing.
That ability to really check in and be present
Yeah.
just allows everything else to work better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, can you talk a little bit about this newer model that you're practicing and having such success with, but contrast that with the old school model too?
Okay. I am an authority on the old school model, Ted.
Yeah.
See, over 50 years ago, I was taught the same things that most performers still are being taught and believe.
Mm-hmm.
It was all about practice, practice, and practice more. And you practice for grandma, and you practice for grandma's dog, and you start with the low stress performances, and you just build up. And if you've practiced enough, you won't have stage fright.
And if you do have stage fright, it's your fault for not practicing enough.
Right. It's all back on this practice thing.
Yeah.
And when I've mentioned that to people and I said, so if you performed poorly, was it because you didn't practice enough? No, I mean, I did it here, 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 and here. And I, so there's something else going on. So the old school approach really is that sense of if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen and just practice, just work, and you'll either make it or you won't.
Right.
Now, what I like to refer to as the cutting edge, it's really bringing brain science, neurology, it's bringing flow, it's bringing that peak performance state, positive psychology, and it's organizing this in a package that says, wait a minute, how do I set my brain up? How do I set myself up for a great performance?
Mm-hmm.
Now, practice is clearly a part of that.
For sure.
Csikszentmihalyi in his flow diagram, in terms of there's a demand of a task, and there's a skill set required to meet this demand. And where they meet is where we can experience flow. And we want to be able to do that. Now, the thing I like to add to his model is when we bring our skill set, the demand of the task, and our mental skills, we can get into flow faster.
Mm-hmm.
We can stay there more often. We're more willing to take risks that might be out of that comfort zone. And we just manage whatever happens better. And so really bringing a full complement of mental tools to our experience, it keeps that edge sharp, that mental edge. And it's not about just the practice. That whole sense that if I practice enough, it just doesn't hold. You got to know what you're doing. But you bring those mental skills into it, and it becomes so much more enjoyable, the whole experience.
Yeah. So with so many of the folks that I've had the pleasure of speaking to on this podcast, one of the main takeaways that they've said is that singing, or we can expand this to other musicians as well, right? Playing, mm-hmm. whatever you're doing, yeah. is the easy part of the job. It's everything that surrounds it that's so much more complicated and so much more intricate, but also so crucial, especially today when competition is so fierce.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it is in many situations, in terms of we have that skill set, we have that passion, there's things you'd like to be doing, and how do we organize ourselves so we can really enjoy and do that? That takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
I mean, if you know what it takes to put on an opera. Mm-hmm. And there is so much energy that goes on behind the scene before that curtain opens up. Months, if not years before that curtain opens up, stuff is happening. So when the lights are on, people are in the right place, wearing the right things, yeah. doing the right stuff. I mean, there's so much energy there. I had a long time ago, actually a high school friend, we were just talking, he goes, John, you sing so well and it comes so easy to you. And I'm going like, he had no idea. I mean, he hadn't a clue about the number of hours that went into what sounds so easy or looks so easy. Mm-hmm. And what I find is when performers really develop their mental toolbox, that journey is much more manageable. And the same tools they're using to be focused on stage, they can use those to be focused in their rehearsal. And they can use that to be focused with solving a roofing problem for their home. It's like, okay, there's a leak in my roof. How am I going to get this taken care of?
Yeah.
So it's applicable to all situations, but it really just makes such a difference as bringing ourselves to a place where we can freely share what we have. Yeah. And that's really a marvelous thing to be able to see and enjoy.
Yeah. The sort of along those same lines, what I like to make super clear, because I deal with a lot of people who have physical pain sometimes, right? Yeah. And they say, well, I've got pain in my hand, for instance, but I've never had an injury there. Everything is totally fine in my hand. I have, though, injured my opposite foot. You know, I stubbed my toe a bunch. I broke this, I broke that. My ankle's all messed up. Okay. So the tagline there is that the pain in the foot might actually be causing the pain in the hand and the wrist or whatever it is, because we
Hmm.
only have one nerve. We break it up into sections and divide it for study, but it's
Interesting.
all
Yeah.
interconnected.
Right.
So a trauma in one part of that nerve can have a huge effect in the other. So working on these mental skills has incredible carryover because we're all using the same brain all the time. We only have one brain, we only have one nerve. I just love that there's so much crossover, but our educations, of course, are different when we come to this. But it seems like we've reached a similar place that there's so much crossover, and we have to start with the brain. That's where things live.
Well, we start with the brain and we have to work with our body too. And, we're working with this, it's really not an entity that's separate. There's not a brain and there's not a body. It's all the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
Ted, you bring up a really important piece of how an injury or a trauma over here could be impacting over there. Um, in my years as a practicing psychologist, that's the majority of what I talked about.
Oh,
But it's
really?
also amazing to look at how the impact on the context of performance and performance experience also can have a life altering effect. I got a
Mm.
beautiful story for you. You ready for
Please.
this?
Yes, please.
I'm doing a workshop with the parents of kids taking piano lessons. One of my favorite workshops to do
Okay.
because I want to help the parents understand what their child's going through and how to be a great parent coach rather than an expectation coach.
Hmm.
How to maintain that relationship as they're developing their skills. That's one of my favorite things to talk about.
Wow, I've never thought about approaching it from that direction, but now that you say it, it makes perfect sense.
Well, again, a child grows up from the perspective that there's a whole list of rights and wrongs. And little Johnny, when you say, Johnny, just go out there and do your best, he's going, oh crap, I got to do it right. Oh no. Okay, what's going to happen if I do it wrong? What if I make a mistake? What if I
Sure.
have an accident? There's all kinds of issues there. But anyway, so here I'm doing this workshop. And I just kind of casually said, all right, I'm just kind of curious. How many of you in this room, these parents of piano kids, would consider yourselves to be a singer? And about three-quarters of the hands make it in the air.
Okay.
Great. Okay, how many of you would say you're a non-singer? They just exploded like, me. That's me. I'm a non-singer.
Okay.
Then I came back and I said, all right, non-singers, how many of you have vocal cords? And they all raised
I
their
hope they
hands.
all. Okay, good.
They all raised their hands, yeah. How many of you have sung happy birthday somewhere before? And they all but one raised their hands.
Hmm.
And the whole room was like, what is up with you? I was just like, whoa.
Yeah.
And she felt this pressure. And she goes, I mouthed the words. And I'm going, all right, tell me the story here. What is up with this?
Yeah.
And she described being a little girl at a birthday party. She was there singing happy birthday with just the energy and enthusiasm of a little kid just loving a birthday party. Her older brother was also there. And when the happy birthday was over and whatever he said and how he said it left an impact in her brain, like you are just
Hmm.
not to sing.
Okay.
And boom, here she was, a mother. She wouldn't sing hymns in church. She wouldn't sing the Star Spangled Banner. She wouldn't sing happy birthday for her own daughter. Now, of course, that was an opportunity for me.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I invited her to sing happy birthday to all of us. Now, her brain was just going through contortions. You could just feel it. And she was like, whoa, can I? Yes. And
Just
she goes,
incredibly activated in that moment.
oh, clearly,
Yeah.
clearly activated. And she goes, okay, yeah, I'll do this. And she sang a delightful rendition of Happy Birthday. But that habit, history, again, the emotional traumas that we carry, we all got different emotional traumas. Life's a tough thing to be a part of,
It's true.
and they get triggered as well. And that's one of the things that I love to do. Here's a great exercise about that I do in my class.
Oh, cool.
I have students write a description of their worst performance ever. Now, performing artists tend to be a little dramatic, very
Us?
creative.
Never. No.
Yes. No, no,
Yeah.
no, no. Okay. And so, anyway, I get these really dramatic stories. And some of these stories are really painful.
Mm.
One time I said, all right, I'd like a couple of kids, three students to read their stories. All three of the stories that were read that night in class had the same ending. The instrument they were playing, they quit that day.
Wow.
Like they wouldn't do that anymore.
Okay.
Now that's really, I don't have the research on this. This would be a great research topic, but where have people stopped performing because of a bad performance? Lots of places, lots of times. Now, sometimes that makes sense. Other times it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But just that ability to recognize that we can take a worst performance ever story and then we can work it. We spend 3 weeks, and when I do my Musician's Path workshop, I do the same assignment and we work with this, but we spend 3 weeks looking at that whole story, word by word, sentence by sentence.
Mm.
And what they hand in my class is a victory statement. Now, at first, they're going like, there is no victory here. But when they hand it in and it says things like, I discovered the importance of having a backup read, I will never perform without one again.
Mm.
Now, that is a powerful statement. I discovered I could make mistakes and finish strong. I discovered it really doesn't matter who's in the audience.
Incredibly valuable lessons.
Oh, beautiful lessons. That ability to reframe and shape that negative traumatic moment. And I've never yet seen a performer when I said, worst performance ever. Oh yeah, man, July 17th. Oh my heavens. I remember that day when X happened. And to be able to start to look at that and say, okay, where is the victory here?
Mm.
And to be able to start to say, let's look at each word in each sentence and let's look at that narrative, that story we're making up about it. And as we do that, then we get to recognize that we're all storytellers.
Yeah.
And we like our stories. In fact, we even believe most of our stories are true.
Most of the time.
Most of the time.
The stories we tell ourselves are 100% true.
Yeah. And until we start to challenge those. And so that's one of my favorite things to do, is to talk about how to challenge those stories and what kinds of things we can do. And sometimes it's really tough to create a whole different narrative about things.
Only sometimes? I would imagine it's tough all the time.
Well, some of them are easy to like, oh, I'm going to let go of that one. But there's some ones that really stick. And it's like, oh. And those are usually the ones around, am I good enough? Am I acceptable?
Sure.
Am I being liked? Am I safe? I mean, stories that have that kind of theme to them are really ones that go deep within us that we spend a lot of time working on. Like, I guess that's why I was talking to my psychologist yesterday. It's just like we spend a lot of time working on those things.
Yeah. 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 What would you say might be the first step for someone who is struggling with that?
Well, to recognize we all have an ongoing narrative. We all have an ongoing story. And that story is composed of facts and the meaning we give the facts.
Mm.
And so typically we collapse fact and meaning as it's the same thing. Mistakes are bad.
Right.
But as you start to look at this, and you start to separate the facts from the meaning, then you can get that frontal cortex, that decider brain. I like to simplify it. We have a decider brain, we have an analyzer brain, we have a panic brain. It's like, and it's like when we can get our analyzer brain to look at our story, then we can decide, well, what do I want to make this mean?
Does X actually mean Y, or did I make that up? Maybe X could mean Z.
Yeah. Well, we make up stuff all the time.
Yeah.
I've got a great story about this.
Great.
I was feeling rather adventurous, and partly because I was learning how to do some canyoneering and having a blast doing that.
Great.
So I took my entire performance psychology class to a climbing gym.
Okay.
And I simply said, this is a metaphorical experience. What shows up here shows up there.
Mm.
What shows up on your stage will show up here, and vice versa. And they were like, cool. So we get there and we get trained, barely. Equipped with a harness, barely enough to be safe. We're let loose.
Yeah.
Lots of energy, lots of noise, bells ringing, kids going up and down the walls. And my attention was like, she hasn't moved. She's like standing in the same place she did during the training. So I went over to her and I simply said, are you going to climb that wall? No, I'm too short.
Mm.
And I'm going like, okay, this is metaphor time. I responded with, so tell me where being too short has impacted you as a performing artist. She had a long list of places. Her list ended with, my hands are so small I can't play Rachmaninoff on the piano.
Huh.
And I'm going, okay, this is a big deal in your life. Then I asked her where she got the idea she was too short to climb in the gym. And she quickly pointed to the wall and said, you have to be 5 feet 2 or taller to climb here. And I'm going like, okay, just so you know, that's a difficulty rating. It's not a height requirement.
It was a difficulty 5-2er. Okay. Yeah, because that, of course, if you'd never been in a gym, you would never know that that's how they grade courses, right?
Right. Well, and see what's so interesting about this is if you think about the brain reacting again.
Yeah.
She's in a class experience. No one ever mentioned anything about height requirements. She got equipped and trained like everybody else. There was this more than obvious expectation to engage and participate,
Mm-hmm.
but her brain reacted to that number on the wall so intensely. She knew, and this is the piece that I really like to talk about, is her context. Her relationship was now defined by that one little piece of tape on the wall that she interpreted as, I am too short, I cannot climb here, which is really powerful.
Yeah.
I mean, she couldn't even break out of that path to say, Dr. Skidmore, we got numbers like going all around the walls on the gym here. They seem to range from, I guess that's a 5'2" to a 5'11" C. What are these things? She couldn't say that. She couldn't make any kind of inquiry. So it defined her relationship so strongly that she was just like, I'm too short. I can't climb here.
She got
Now, as
that.
soon as I,
She
what was
got
that?
that one piece of information that, in her mind, confirmed the story she'd been telling herself for who knows how many years, and then she just ran
Absolutely.
with that all the way to truth, whatever that means.
Yes. Well, and she would have not climbed had I not interrupted that.
Hmm.
She was just in this little passive place of, I guess I'm too short and I can't do this.
Yeah.
And that has to go back to some experience where she learned that her height was a limiting factor in her life. And she got stuck with that. So when we start to look at ourselves as storytellers, and in my book, I have a great perspective in this. I call it story busting.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to look at these stories and we start to challenge that and say, wow, this is my story. Is this a story I want to keep? Does this support my vision, my goal as a performer? When I work with somebody individually, I do a very extensive assessment, and I draw on my background of being a psychologist. Now, an abbreviated assessment's in my book, chapter 2. But when you think about the phrase mistakes are, see, that could be a 3-word sentence. Mistakes are, boom,
Or yeah, and you can
unbearable.
fill in your story there.
Yeah, that's where you tell your story. The audience is the enemy.
That's a
I've heard
powerful
that.
one.
I've heard that a few times.
Wow.
Okay. And so you start to look at the audience as the enemy. That's a story that people get stuck with. Now, here's a great tool, and that's one thing I'm all about. I love to coach tools.
Great.
So I like to refer to this as the 5 ands, ANDS.
Mm-hmm.
So you take your story, and whatever you say, if you leave it with a period, that's where your story ends. If you put the word and in there, you can start to move that story, and the goal is to move it in a positive direction. So there was a young cello player who in February auditions for and gets a scholarship. This is exciting.
Great start.
This is a great start. In May, his high school invited him to perform at his high school awards assembly. Okay, call it a perk. Nice little honor. Well, unfortunately, it was a horrible performance. It was a humiliating, devastating, just terrible performance. And he had this sentence in his mind, I am never doing this again. Period. He resigned his scholarship. He quit playing his cello. Now, there's got to be more to that story that I don't even know about. Okay? I'm sure more than a few people tried to talk to him to like pull that period off the page and put an and there. So Ted, let's just play around with this.
Please.
Put yourself in the mind of that, 18-year-old young man who's just got embarrassed in front of all of his friends. And he goes, I am never doing that again. And
you can't make me.
And
it's difficult to keep this story going when you ask for that next thing, because my mind immediately goes to how to flip that story as well, because I've done a little bit of this work as well.
Okay. So go with it. Let's just kind of role play this and go with it
Sure.
a couple times in the negative, and then start to flip it around and see what happens.
Sure, totally. So and you can't make me.
And you can't make me.
And I'm gonna throw away my cello.
And
if I never hear the cello again, it'll be I'll have lived a good life. And maybe one day I'll recover, but it won't be with music.
Okay, start to spin it to a positive.
And even though it was a horrible experience, I still survived. I managed to wake up the next day. And I was still able to go back to school, and none of my friends abandoned me after that performance. And I can still go to college and still live a decent life, even though I have this horrible experience in my rearview mirror.
And I am so glad I didn't play like that in February. Whoa. And so we turn that around. I just call that the turnaround.
Yeah.
And we turn that around. And unfortunately, he didn't know how to do that. And that I'm never doing that again. You can't make me, just boom. And a lot of us have issues with that for some reason.
Sure.
But see, to be able to start to look at that story and say, okay, how can I turn this into a positive thing?
Yeah.
Really important.
Finding wins no matter what happens, right? It's
yeah.
I like to think about it as stuff happens and we gather data. What we do with that data is all between our ears.
Yeah.
So we spoke a little bit. This was sort of at the beginning now about this word flow. For someone who's never heard of flow before, how would you define it?
Flow is it's like an experience. It's a moment where you could use the words effortless ease. You could use the word deep embodiment, fully present, a sense of joy, a sense of even an ecstasy kind of thing. But whatever's going on is you have the skills to meet the demands of the task, and you are just present in it. And it's fun. It's what we want to do out there on stage.
That's the important part in my mind, is that it's fun.
The first time I experienced anything I could call flow, or at least recognize it as that, I was about 12 years old, taking trumpet lessons, my first recital. So I'd been just hammering away on this one piece, and I was very nervous as I went into it. My mom was my accompanist.
Okay.
So I'm just there, and I, cued her, and she started to play, and I really don't know what happened. It was like just, it just sang out of my trumpet. I'd never played it like that before. My teacher goes, John, how'd you do that? It's like, Bruce, I have no idea. I had no idea what happened.
I just blinked and it was over and everyone was clapping.
Absolutely. And I was thinking I was a really hot trumpet player, man. Like, that was really You
Oh,
know, and so it's really those moments where just time gets lost and we're just in the state of presence. And the thing I find so important is that we can set that up. There are things that trigger flow. There are things that put us in that state of mind
mhm.
so we can really step right into flow and stay there.
What are some of those things that set us up?
Well, first, you've got to have a basic skill set. You've got to have the skills to meet the demand of the task.
And that's where practice comes in.
That's where practice comes in. Again, you think of that in the metaphor of the juggling. You've got one ball, I can do that. I got two balls. Okay, well, I've got two going, but now I got three. Okay, now can I walk? Now can I talk? So we're adding all kinds of things
Mm,
to what we're doing. Well, we get that picture of the skill demands so they're met at a level of mastery, so we don't have to think about doing it.
yeah.
And then it's really about bringing the mindset to it. For example, one of my assignments in my class, again, is to have my students create a setup for flow,
Hmm.
whether it's to go to a concert, perform a solo, go to a lesson, study their chemistry. We want to create a flow kind of experience.
Sure.
And what we really have to do is mentally start to say, I have passion about this. I've got commitment to this. There's an element of interest, maybe even an element of risk, and I'm committed to this.
Mm.
And I'm going to go into this. And we set ourselves up with a positive mindset. We set up the environment as much as we can to support that. For example, school, just like practice time, is being challenged beyond belief by the cell phone.
Totally.
Because texts are flying so fast back and forth. The kids are always, they're going in and out of that zone of productivity.
Yeah, I think I saw recently that the average person between 15 and 25 gets between 200 and 500 notifications per day on their phone.
Oh
Some
my gosh. I
incredible
thought I got
number
a
like
lot.
that. Yeah. I mean,
I
no,
can't keep track of
yeah,
everything either.
no wonder people are distracted and attention spans are shortening.
Well, absolutely. Because we are not requiring that mental um, discipline to keep our attention focused.
Yeah.
And that brings us, okay, how do we learn about that? But the idea behind flow is that this is a place I want to be. It's a skill I've got to step into. And I want to step into this and I do it.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I think is fascinating, Ted, is the characteristics of flow match the characteristics of a child at their favorite playground.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, straight down the list.
Yeah.
I'm present. I want to be here. I got the skills to to meet the demands of this swing or this slide. There's a sense of challenge and mastery.
Mm.
And I'm here until Johnny, time to go home. I don't want to go.
5 more minutes, Mom. It'll be fine.
Yeah. So when you start to think about it, this is why learning to play on stage.
Yeah.
The idea that we can create freedom to play on stage and that we can just be present and enjoy it and roll with that whole experience. That's just so fun.
Yeah.
Compared to I'm out there and I've got terror, I've got unwanted visitors in my head about what's going out here on this stage.
Yeah.
And that's really one of the key characteristics of flow is there's no chatter, there's no self-observation, there's just a sense of being present and in it.
Mm. So flow, in my experience, without specific training, flow is something that's very difficult to find accidentally, and it's even more difficult to create in the moment. Do you feel like the modern performance landscape is set up to help people find flow, or is it the opposite? Is there something that exists in that landscape that makes it more difficult for performers to actually be at their peak?
I think in the landscape today, based on that question, that's a great question. I think it's actually more difficult because the sense of exposure and expectation is so much higher.
Mm-hmm.
I talked to lots of kids who are, wanting to move into the music world and they're wanting to progress, but they just watch somebody on YouTube and they're going, oh man,
Yeah.
I can't do that.
I can't do what they
Or
can do. I'll never make it.
right. And so I think in that sense, mentally, it's much, much more difficult. Um, and I still think there's a huge lack. There's just a big missing in our coaching, our teaching, our training, because that 9-year-old girl has got a tool that's going to support her the rest of her life.
Yeah.
She just gets activated. She knows what to do about it. She's not afraid of being activated. I mean, if we are afraid of stage fright, we get more stage fright.
Right.
I mean, that's just how
It's
it
a vicious
works.
cycle.
It just cycles. And so to be able to look at that and say, we want to be able to step into flow. We have such a great understanding of flow now. My doctoral dissertation was on the experience of peak performance with musicians.
Mm-hmm.
Now, 35 years ago, when I put that together, it was just a preliminary observational kind of thing.
Mm.
What are the components? What does flow feel like? What does it look like? How does it get reported? Today, we've got the brain scans. We've got the MRIs, the EEGs. We've got all this stuff that says the brain is in a different kind of space when we're in flow. The frontal cortex is offline. That evaluator is quiet. And the decider says, I've got this, and I'm going to let my motor skills just go into that. And the danger part of the brain says, we got this. No problem here. Let's just go.
There is no danger. Whatever.
No danger. Let's enjoy this. Let's activate that enjoying part of the brain.
Yeah.
And I mean, we can actually measure the hypofrontality, the frontal cortex, like blood flow decreases to the frontal cortex.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just amazing to see what we can understand about that now. And so, learning to bring the mental skills as well as the physical skill to it is one of the key pieces to create more flow.
Yeah. So from my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, you mentioned blood flow, and this is something that I spend tons of time and energy on. So I think it's super interesting. But when we find ourselves in those flow states, you mentioned the decreased blood flow to the frontal lobe, but it also increases blood flow to things like the basal ganglia, the architect of that motor control, and your cerebellum. So all of those subconscious movements that just sort of happen.
Right.
And the technique, again, that we've been working on for the last 50-ish years is finally able to shine, and we're able to show without being so on like anal retentive with every single thing. It just happens. Right. Things just fall into place.
Yeah. Well, and that so beautifully describes that sense of flow, is that part of the brain that I like to refer to it as the flow brain.
Totally.
It's just all lit up.
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, let's just stay in this until we get kicked out of it, or we finish our performance, or something happens and, let's get back into it or not.
Right.
That's the other thing I love to teach people about flow, is it's not like a spotlight that's there, it's on or it's off. Mm-hmm. It will get very narrow. It will get very wide. Sometimes we go to a very specific thing over here. We can come back into flow. It's a dynamic experience. Mm-hmm. And to be able to recognize this, that, I have some control over this. I invited a faculty member to come to my class one night, and it's really a fun class. Anyway, and he wanted to perform. I said, great. And so he did this beautiful piano piece. And as we were talking about the experience of performing post-performance, I asked him if he noticed his attention shifting at all during the performance. Mm. And he goes, oh, yeah. There I was in the middle of my piece, and I heard the doors to the room open up, and I heard them shut, and they're big, heavy, clunky metal doors.
Sure.
And his next thought was, I did not reserve this room. I wonder if somebody's reserved this room. Now, that took him completely out mentally of the experience, but he was also skilled enough, and we're like, well, I'll worry about that later. Let's get back into my music.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes we can do that. Our attention can shift ever so slightly, and if it's that much too much, we're in trouble.
It can be it can feel, or even when you're telling the story, sound like a tiny little stimulus, but if that pushes you a little bit too high, a little bit too activated at the wrong moment, then who knows what could happen.
Well, we all know what it'd be like if we were performing on stage and a fire alarm went off.
Right.
That would trump everything.
Right.
It was a boom. Okay, what are we doing? Okay. But again, if a cell phone goes off and suddenly you go into this tirade of like, you inconsiderate, this is my aria, why are you ruining this?
Right.
You're going to be out of flow really fast.
Sure. Sure. It's also in that specific example, it also feels like a selfish thought in that moment to be like, how dare you ruin my moment?
Oh, absolutely.
From what I've seen, that level of thought, of that selfishness is another great way to be out of flow. Because you're no longer telling a story, you're now showing off. And I've never had someone who's showing off and also be in flow at the same time.
No, because you're showing off, you're judging yourself to see if you're good enough and hoping they'll think you're good enough.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't tell you how many performers I've worked with when I go to the perspective of, okay, so what is your story that you want to tell? What is the gift you want to give?
Mm.
Make that the most important thing.
Yeah. I
And
think sorry, please go ahead. Please continue.
Well, it's just that sense of when you can focus on giving that gift, you're not being selfish.
Yeah. That's such a valuable question. Just being able to ask yourself that question. And no matter where you are in your musical study, if you're 9, if you're 90, you still have something that you can give.
Right.
And knowing what that is and being able to define what that is from one performance to another, to another, to another, even within the span of if you have multiple performances in a single day, you are probably, hopefully, have a different thing to give in each of those performances. I think that's such an important and incredible question. And I only wish that I was smart enough to listen when someone told me that however many years ago. John,
there's
I could talk about this with you all day.
for sure.
But we are sort of coming up on time here. Is there any final bit of wisdom that you would like to leave with the audience?
I ran across this phrase: risk, fail, risk again. Now, when I heard that, it was like, boy, I'm grabbing that one. I'm going to latch onto that.
Yeah.
See, that's what peak performers do. See, a peak performer can risk, they can fail, they can risk again. Now, what do we do if we're caught up in the old school? We risk, we fail, we're embarrassed, we're ashamed, we avoid, we get anxious, we get worried. And so to really take on that, I want to be a peak performer, which means every time I step out there on stage, I'm willing to open up and take the risk of sharing my gift. I know the process. I can share this gift in a way that's committed, that's a way that's going to be generous. I'm willing to do that. I'm also willing to accept whatever shows up, because sometimes things don't show up exactly as we expect them to.
Totally.
But I know I can learn from every performance. So my risk, my performance, it's not going to be a period. It's going to be an and. And I'm going to learn from this, and I'm going to take whatever I get from this to help me shine that much brighter, be that much clearer, that much more joyful on stage next time I'm out there. So it's risk, fail, risk again.
Risk, fail, risk again. It's so powerful. It really, really is. Again, John, I have had such a blast talking with you today on the podcast and our conversation yesterday as well. If someone would like to get in touch with you, maybe get a copy of your incredible book, which I could not recommend more highly, by the way, for anyone listening, what's the best way for someone to reach out?
JohnSkidmore.com, and it's JONSKIDMORE is my website. I'm on Facebook as well, and I would love to connect with all of you. And Ted, for your audience, I'd love to offer a 30-minute discovery consultation.
Wow. That's
and
incredible.
So if you would like to just call me or go out onto my website and we can start to book some of these things, I would love to be able to do that, to see if the coaching services that I provide could make a difference for you.
Wow.
It's so exciting to see people move beyond where they think where their journey has ended. And I love to do that. So I'd love to whoever would like to get hold of me, let me know that you're on your podcast here, and I'd set up a half-hour consultation with you. I'll send out a little questionnaire, and then we'll just have a conversation for a half hour and see if there's some things I can do to support you in your dreams for that freedom on your stage.
Wow. Thank you so much, John. That is an incredible offer. For anyone who's hearing this, if you've got to do it. You've got to take John up on that
Thank you,
offer.
Ted.
Genuinely, like, we're recording this in 2024. We met in 2017. What is that? 7 years difference. I remember as part of your tenure with that Taos summer program, you did something similar, and I got to have a 30. I think we may have gone a little over
Probably.
minute consultation. And I remember taking notes, and I still refer to those notes on
Wow.
a
Thank you.
semi-regular basis. So anyone listening, if you have even the tiniest thought that John might be a little bit useful to you, schedule that consultation. You will not regret it.
You can find that information on my website. So that'll be great.
And it will also be linked in the description, either down below or to the left or wherever these platforms choose to put it.
Okay.
So I will leave it there for you. John, thank you so much for your incredibly valuable time and for that wonderful offer as well. I hope every single person who listens to this finds a way to get on your calendar because it made a world of difference for me, and I'm sure that it will for them as well.
I hope so as well, Ted. Thank you. It's been a delight to meet with you again. I'm so glad you remembered how to juggle. You can still juggle, and we're always doing that. So again, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity of being here with you.
My absolute pleasure, John. I can't wait to talk to you again soon. I hope you liked listening to that conversation as much as we enjoyed having it. Before you go, make sure that you do all the social media stuff, like, comment, share, and subscribe. It's the best way to help the podcast grow. And if you haven't already, make sure you check out the description for the link to schedule your free 30-minute consultation with Dr. Skidmore and the link to take the Mind-Body Connection Assessment. Can't wait to see your results, and I'll see you next week.